You guys hear me? Do I need this to speak? Can you hear me okay if I'm just like this, or you want me to speak into the microphone?
I think that the
Test. Oh, I'm on the other now. Okay, well, okay, you guys can hear me. So, yeah, I've learned so much already this morning from this afternoon's first talk. So I'm going to talk about some work that I've been doing with bottlenose dolphins, and I've been really trying to also, like you, decode the communication signals of other species. And as many of you know, there's been a history of people working, trying to find ways of giving other species a code that we can share. And Brian, you were speaking to some of this, how can we come halfway to meet them? And in decoding, my colleagues and I have tried to use two approaches. I think there are two really, and probably many more paths that we can take. But in the work we've done, and I started my lab back in 1979. Yeah, no, I was a student in 1979. I opened my lab in 1983 after I got my PhD. And I thought, wow, if we want to try to communicate or figure out how other animals are communicating, we can use observational techniques, listening, recording their signals, using computers to analyze their data, the data we're getting. But there may be another way where we can use an interactive system with them, where we try to, again, meet them halfway. And that's a lot of the work I've been trying to do, and we're continuing to do it today. So first, let me introduce you to my collaborator. And I honestly mean, I consider these as my research collaborators, because in watching them, they kind of show you what to do next. You know, I always tell the students in my lab, don't be so fast to make a hypothesis to try to figure out what to test. Just watch them, listen to them, find your own way of seeing and hearing them. And, you know, patterns emerge that others may not have seen, and we may be wrong most of the time, because most of the time what we do is failing, but sometimes we get lucky. And, but it's fun to fail in a lot of ways, and then you try other things. So today I want to just talk to you a little bit about some of the work we've done on trying to decode dolphin communication. A lot of what we've done is looking at vocal development from birth on, and trying to understand how dolphins use their own repertoires. And I've studied cognition as well. Not that communication isn't cognition, it's all sort of the same thing. So we did some studies. I'm not going to talk about this, but in terms of the cognitive work, this is a dolphin playfully watching herself spin in a mirror. And some of the work we've done looking at cognition is giving dolphins ways of showing us what I call their best stuff. So if you give a dolphin or an elephant, we've done both studies with dolphins and elephants, mirrors, what we found was that they, like us, like great apes, and a handful of other species, recognize themselves in a mirror. They have this level of awareness of self, which is pretty sophisticated that many other animals don't. And in general, I've been trying to find ways that approaches that give us glimpses of aspects of the dolphin mind, their communication and their cognition. And I try to give them things that I think will be enriching for them, because most of the dolphins I've worked with that are in aquaria, because I feel that if I'm going to give them artificial signals, and you'll hear about some of the work we've done, I didn't want to put the artificial signals into the wild, because I wasn't sure ethically if I wanted to do that. I thought, well, the dolphins we have in aquaria probably need enriched environments. Why don't we try to give them choice and control and try to find out more of their cognitive abilities? So we've used mirrors, we've used underwater keyboards. We've now created a dolphin touch screen, which hopefully I'll have some time to tell you about, to see what happens if we give them a means of interaction. So I'll sort of try to take you through a trip about a little bit of this research today. So Franz already told you a good deal about dolphins. I'll go through this really quickly. He covered a lot in his beautiful talk this morning. Dolphins, like us, have big, complex brains. Their brains are larger than ours. Ours are about 1,300 grams. Theirs weigh in at about 1,700 grams. Again, these are bottlenose dolphins. And they have, their brain is second largest in terms of what we call the EQ, encephalization quotient, their brain size to body size, or brain mass to body mass, as ours. These are, again, the second largest in terms of EQ to us humans. Here's this big, beautiful brain. I don't study the neurobiology of these brains, other colleagues do, but I'm really interested in what they're doing with these brains. So we're going to bypass that and get into what's going on here a little bit from what we can see. And again, honestly, we're in the infancy of these studies still. Dolphins, as we heard from Franz earlier, live in complex societies in the seas. Some of our work is in the wild. Let me see if I can bring this up a little bit more. We worked in Bimini and Belize. Watching them, we will slip into the water and stay at a distance and record what they're doing, and then try to analyze them. And we haven't actually even started working with folks doing AI, and I'm really excited about some new connections we're making here today. Dolphins are non-handed, yet they're highly manipulative. And we've seen, I'm not going to show you all the videos, I cut this because it would go too long, but we've watched dolphins in aquaria create beautiful bubble rings, blowing air rings from their blowhole and monitoring them and kicking them with their tails when they're ill-formed and then producing new ones. If we have time, I can show you some of that in a little bit. But in the wild, they manipulate their environment as well. They're non-handed, but they blow, humpbacks and other animals will create bubble nets to capture prey. And they work collaboratively in many of their foraging activities. They can forage by themselves using barrier feeding, but they do work collectively in child rearing, in offspring rearing, in mating behaviors, and in foraging. They're highly cooperative as well. And we're looking at some cooperative behavior right now. We're actually watching how dolphins coordinate their behavior when they're asked to do a task, do something that's different than you've done before, and do it with your buddy. So I don't have those results in yet, but that's a study we're currently doing. Dolphins, again, live in complex societies in the seas. They have a fission-fusion social structure. They have long-lasting relationships. They show empathic behavior, caregiving behavior. They show comparable cognitive abilities with great apes, and they're vocal learners. And that's what I'm going to be talking about more today. Dolphins show a really strong proclivity for vocal learning and vocal imitation. And because of this, I thought maybe we could create a system that would give them novel signals that were unlike the signals they were producing, but within the time and frequency domain of things they could produce to meet them halfway. Yeah, Brian, I'm with you on this one. So I'm going to talk about some of that work using what we observe from them, again, partnering with them. They're giving me the ideas of what to do. I didn't get this by myself. And again, one of the things that I felt that's so compelling, and we've heard this from a lot of the speakers today, is if we're trying to decode what's the nature of their lexicon, what's the smallest unit of sound that they're making, we don't know. How would we possibly find out? We need some cipher to be able to figure out what they're doing. How do you get a cipher? How do we get some kind of insight into discovering what they're about? The other questions are, what about their syntax? What kind of temporal organization do we see of these signals? Even if we don't know the smallest unit, how are they temporally organized? And of course, to be able to understand that, we need to know how to do how to attribute certain signals to certain individuals. Because if we're just hearing a mishmash of signals, how do we know they're even related to each other when we look at these groups? So sound localization is a key aspect, and we heard some ways of doing that today with D tags and a variety of other signals. And then finally, what about the meaning or semantics of these signals? So interestingly, and my background was in bioacoustics and communication theory. And when you think about semantics, one of the basic tenets of communication theory is that meaning is not in the signal. I mean, we tend to think meaning, what's the meaning of a word? The meaning is in us. We generate meanings. Hopefully they're shared enough across individuals, but absolute meaning is not in the message itself. It's in how it's interpreted by receivers and senders. There's some general kind of meaning, or we wouldn't be able to communicate with each other, but meaning is generally in us. So instead of worrying about semantics, I think for us folks who want to study animal signals, if we think about pragmatics or function, how it's used, and one of my favorite stories was told by Gregory Bateson, and he talked about that he and I think his wife at the time was Margaret Mead. They had taken their son on a trip to Mexico, and their son didn't know Spanish, and they were unpacking their bags in their hotel room, and they suddenly heard their son out playing in the street with a few of the kids. They were playing a game of football, and they heard their son yelling, "Aki, Aki," and he would get the ball. He didn't know the language. And when he came upstairs, they said, "How did you know what that meant?" And he said, "I don't know what it meant. I just watched what happened when people yelled "Aki, Aki," and I got the ball." So I think that's the level, if we're really good at observing and watching how these signals are correlated with behavior, it may give us a key, hopefully. So one of the first things I did when I started trying to study dolphins is I started making a dictionary of their sounds, and each one of these is a little sound spectrogram, again, frequency on this axis across time. And Brenda McGowan, who is probably listening today with her students, we started trying to look at what the dolphins were doing from birth on, and we were able to learn when they started echolocating, how that developed. We did some studies of vocal ontogeny from birth on, and then also we looked at the vocal repertoires. But it's really hard to look at these signals when, again, we have no cipher. How do we know what is this? Is this one element here, and then is this another element? Are they combinatorial, or is this one signal? How do we know how it's organized? And we're still kind of miffed at this. So we studied vocal learning in young dolphins to try to watch a simple system develop over time. And I think we did get some insights. Again, I'm not going to have time to talk too much about that right now because I want to focus on other work, but we did show that dolphins, like birds, which were our main model for vocal learning, showed babbling. They overproduced sounds. And we had looked at the adult vocal repertoires in this pool. We only had 3 dolphins, 2 females and a male, and they gave birth to 2 young dolphins, and that's the group we watched. So we looked at their repertoires, and we looked at how a simple system develops over the first year. And again, we saw evidence for babbling, overproduction, and attrition of those sounds, much like we see in young children. And then the work that we did, the work has continued over the years. More currently, we've been using, and I've been doing work with my colleague, Marcella Magnasco, who's a biophysicist at the Rockefeller University. We've been working in the field using unmanned aerial systems, drones, to watch dolphins. We're recording from a boat that's downstream, and I'm wondering if I can get that sound a little bit louder. I'm sorry, I'm borrowing David's computer. And here we get these beautiful shots where we're not disturbing them, and we can start seeing, hopefully, patterns that are associated with acoustic patterns that are associated with some of their behaviors. This is dolphins at an area where they're foraging. So I think this is really has a huge potential for us to see patterns, again, of interaction. Just sort of giving you a potpourri of some of the approaches we've taken. But what I'm going to talk about today primarily is this study that I did a long time ago in an aquarium far, far away. This actually not so far away because we're in California. This aquarium was really close. I gave this talk to David's class, a similar talk when I was in New York. I'm at Hunter College, but we actually did this right up the road here at Marine World Africa, USA. And the idea was that what if we give dolphins, a non-handed species, an underwater keyboard? Now, I told you they were manipulative, and they can manipulate things with their rostrum. And I was really inspired by studies that people had been doing of using sign language with chimps or keyboards with chimps. Irene Pepperberg is a close friend of mine as well, and I actually work with her group. I'm her vice president of the Alex Foundation, and I was really intrigued by the idea of giving them some kind of shared code. So with the help of Hewlett-Packard and funding from Ampex and Hewlett-Packard and a variety of other places, we built this underwater keyboard system. This is where I started feeling really old. We did this in 1983, 84. Wow, we barely could do it. We developed this underwater keyboard that was interfaced with fiber optic cables. It was run on light, so it would be safe. Into an Apple II computer. You believe an Apple II computer? Oh my God. And here's the way it worked. The question, first of all, was what would happen if we gave these really big brains, thinking about them almost like non-terrestrial, they're non-terrestrials, they're totally aquatic. I didn't want to train dolphins. I wanted to work with a big brain and give them choice and control. Let's assume they're really intelligent. What happens if we give them a system that they can control and we're subject to doing what they want us to do. So many, many years prior to this, some other scientists, Kellogg and Reiss, had done studies showing that dolphins could visually discriminate white forms against the black background. So we based this on some old work. I did some other studies from some of my doctoral work to make sure they could discriminate this in air or when it was two-dimensional. But for ease of the dolphins, we made them three-dimensional. So when this was submerged underwater, they could use echolocation or vision. And each of these is movable. So the symbols appeared on the keyboard in pseudo-random ways. So if the dolphins were going to use a particular symbol, and here's just a little diagram, if they hit a triangle, they would hear a particular whistle that sounds like that. It was a computer-generated call, and they would get a ball. We picked things that they showed a preference for. Whoops, let me back up for a minute. If they hit an H shape, they would get a tickle or a rub from us and hear a different sound. So each of these symbols was associated with a different sound, again, within their own time frequency domain, but different than their existing signals. And we put sort of flat parts on this so we could pick them apart. And again, I did this work with Brenda McCowan, who came to the lab after the first year of this work and did the analysis with me on this. So the question is, if we gave them control over this and they had control over contingencies, what would happen? Again, remember, they show a strong proclivity for vocal imitation. So the way this works, whoops, once again, is we had two births at Marine World. We had studied their vocal development. And then when they were about 11 months old, we gave them and their moms a keyboard. So it was in a social context, because learning is a social behavior. We wanted it to be in a social context. So what the dolphins could do, this is when they were a bit older, because this ran for 2 years. And we were down 2 years because we had to move Marine World Africa USA, where we did this study that was in Redwood City. We were down for 2 years. We picked it up when we moved to Northern California in Vallejo, north of San Francisco in Vallejo. So here is Delphi, one of the two young males that was born in the facility. If he hits a key, he hears a sound, and we give him the corresponding object. So I would be, either my student or I would be wearing a headset, standing behind the keyboard. There was no right and wrong answer. And we would have to oblige by giving them what they had asked for. And again, the keys were pseudo randomized. I have to tell you one funny quick story here. I'm just going to watch the time. We had initially given them a key for fish, ball, and rub, 3 different categories. And one of the dolphins started using it first, Pan. These were 2 young dolphins and their moms. The mothers didn't use the keyboard. It was the youngsters that did, which was interesting in itself. The mothers took this as a giant babysitting device. I like to joke about this because they were very vigilant until we put the keyboard in. Always, one of them was always with the 2 calves. So, pardon me? After the keyboard, when the keyboard wasn't in, they were vigilant again. But when the keyboard went in, they started resting, and the little guys could be by themselves. Any of us who have had kids would be appreciative of this situation. So we had first given them 3 options. It was either a fish key, which was a circle, ball, or rub. And the first dolphin who started, Pan, started using the fish key right away. And he wasn't even eating fish yet. He was still, they nursed until they were about 3 or 4 years old. Started eating the fish, mouthing the fish. The other dolphin was just watching, and I just decided after a couple of weeks I was going to remove the food key, which we did. And the first day we removed the food key, there were 3 symbols on a 9-key matrix, and the symbols would be moved around. The first day the fish key wasn't there, he's looking, and he would always come up and hit the fish key. He went down to the bottom of the pool and picked up a piece of fish and held it against the blank key. We didn't do anything because he would have just continued to do that. But I think that's pretty telling of what was intended there. I mean, these are smart animals. What we found was they started to actively use the keyboard. And here's just an underwater piece from PBS show Nature that they did. This is an underwater view of them looking towards the cameraman in the pool, but this is what it looks like from a dolphin's point of view. They hit the key, They get the corresponding object, hear a sound, and then they can do anything with it. They are in charge of the show here. Okay, so, and sometimes they'd want to interact with us. Sometimes they'd want to just play by themselves. This was Delphi and Pan. Their mothers were with them in the pool the whole time. And that's sort of the way it worked. Yeah, Brian.
It was interesting that you chose to make. I would have guessed that you would make the round symbol for the ball. And did you purposefully not do that?
Yeah.
So that, analog?
Yeah, I didn't want it to be iconic. And there was nothing representational about any of the sounds with the objects either. They were totally arbitrary. Again, remember, we were in the infancy of all this. I barely knew what we were doing on this. So what we found was that after very few trials, the dolphins imitated these signals. So after 19 exposures to ball, they started imitating. I'll show you how they did it. After 9 exposures to rub, imitation, ring, 2 exposures. 2 years later, when we reintroduced it, they imitated disc and float after the first time, really fast, with great fidelity. So this is what was so exciting. So again, these are spectrograms. I don't have a point. Do I have a pointer on here? Yeah. So let me see. I can't. No. Okay. I'll just give. So at the top, that's the ball signal. In A, they did the end of the ball signal first. That's a nice example of the recency effect. Okay. Next time, this was Pan, same dolphin, ball signal. He does the beginning. Okay, very sensitive to time and frequency of these signals. Next time, matching harmonics structure. It doesn't look exactly, he's lost some of the fidelity to the contour, but it sounds just like it. It's got the timbre right. And the very next time, puts it all together in one. That's the first evidence we had for the process of vocal learning in these guys. We know that, I mean, it was astonishing to see it. Yeah.
So, for us, happy birthday to you is the same as happy birthday to you. Are they doing absolute pitch or is it a relative?
Both. And this was critical for decoding. Again, what we did was we looked, not all my slides are here, not all because I didn't know I was giving this talk today. So let me show you this. So here we have, I'm going to answer that question in a second. I just can't show it to you. So here we have a computer version of Ring, the Dolphin, before it's even halfway produced, pretty good imitation. So not only do they do they can match the absolute frequency and time, but then they started to do compressions and compressions and expansions in both the time frequency domain. The thing that was preserved is contour. Okay, that was the salient part. And when you think about biological systems like our own, I can say fire or fire, and I can say it high or low or shorter or longer. So I think for us at the time, this was 1983, 1984, we were doing this. We were doing a lot of, we were trying to figure out how to analyze these signals. And we know we need to normalize them if we're going to analyze them now. So that was a big key in. And then we also, so I just don't have this, I can't show you the compression and expansion, but we have that. I just didn't have it on this one. We found that the dolphins would start to spontaneously imitate, but they were also producing these signals. And what I mean by that is we defined imitation as if they did these facsimiles within 5 seconds of the model sound. We defined production if it wasn't following the model sound. So they could come up to the keyboard and produce that sound ball and then hit the ball key, or produce the sound ring and hit the ring key. We never got the wrong sound produced before the other key. That was pretty amazing. And when I say never, we did not have that, which was interesting. So it suggested they had learned associations between the sounds and the visual forms. But then we found that they started to produce those sounds when they were playing with the correct object. So what Brenda and I did when we did the analysis is we had some students just looking at the video without the sound, because we had everything video and audio taped. And then we would Brenda and I would look at just the acoustics without the context. And when we aligned them, so we were blind to the context. When we aligned them, we found that when we were getting the dolphins producing the facsimile for computer ring, it was when they were approaching or playing with a ring. And again, here's the computer ring, here's the dolphin ring. so that they started. So for example, the dolphin pan approaches the green ring and then interacts with it. They started showing what looked to be that it could be referential, but we never claimed that because we didn't do the requisite studies to check comprehension. We could look at productive use. And, we had to be really conservative, and we wanted to be conservative and show the patterns. Now, this was really exciting for us. During the study, here's the rub signal. So if the dolphin pushed the H-shaped key, that helped us remember that name, human rub. If they pushed the H-shaped key, they would hear, and here's the dolphin. Remember, we heard Franz's beautiful talk about signature whistles. Pan is at the keyboard and he puts his signature right after rub and rolls over for a rub. We got that a few times. Down here, you see the W again, it's a little fainter. I was changing the symbols on the keyboard. The symbol position would change every 2 minutes. It would freeze. And then I'd have to reposition them. The computer would say to me, ball on 1, ring on 4. It would tell me where to put it. And I was changing the symbols, and this is Pan rubbing on my hand. He is whistling rub with his signature. So this was the beginning of starting to see these guys were actively using these sounds back with us. There's more. We started in the second year of the 2-year study, we started getting signals that looked like this when they were in a particular context. We think this, so this is ring and ball. And it was coming during a period of time when they had created a new game. This is Dolphin game. We called it double toy play, when they would touch one of the symbols and get a ball, and then wait there and then touch another one and get a ring, take them both and start tossing them up into the air. And that's the context in which we heard during this double toy play what looks to be a combination signal. Now, the real poetic part of this, which I really love, is Jill Tarter, who I know he was invited here today. Jill is still a friend of mine, and her daughter actually worked at our lab. Jill was sitting next to me, and it was Jill, who's been looking for signals from space, looked at that and she said, that looks like ring and ball. I love the fact that it was Jill who saw it. And it's exciting because we had, and by the way, so just to show you, these were the sessions we did for the second year, and ring and ball was not one production. This signal continued through all of these sessions, as did other signals, but it was in that one context when they were playing with ring and ball together. So it was terribly exciting for us, because now we're seeing that we gave them these novel signals, and now we're seeing how they're using it. We're looking at the process of vocal learning, but how they may be organizing them. And we started seeing this evidence, at least through this data, that there may be a combinatorial basis here. And that's where it gets interesting, because we're now looking, and this is unpublished stuff. We have some unpublished data we're getting ready to put out, where we looked at some animals at another aquarium in a birthing context. And we now have some evidence that they may be combining some of their own signals into these combinatorial signals. We got this glimpse a couple of years ago, many years ago, I should say, when I was at Marine World, where we'd see Delphi, the same animals, Delphi and Pan, each producing their own contact call. And as they got closer together, the latency between the two calls would decrease and it would become one signal. We called it a Z call. And we just didn't get enough data to know if that was something that was meaningful or not. But I think one of the glimpses, one of the ideas I've gotten from this is, I think we should really be looking to see if they have calls, and this could be true for sperm whales as well, if they're like subgroup calls or affiliation calls or family calls, because that's really important to these guys, those connections, the social relationships. It may not be, but I think it's certainly worth looking at that, because we're starting to see these things. Maybe they may combine calls in some way to express relationship. When we go back and look at, again, I'm just hypothesizing here, but of course, because we didn't have enough data, but when we look at this call, it's when two things were together that we got it. And it may, again, these are things that we can start testing as a community to see, are there calls that might be combinations having to do with spatial proximity, Okay, so just wanted to share that bit with all of us today. 2 year, we were actually down 2 years. We had our first year in Redwood City, and then we had to wait for 2 years to put the keyboard in once we moved up to Vallejo when Marine World moved. I was carrying, this gets back into Dolphin memory, I was carrying the keyboard out to the pool before I even put it in. They had had no sounds in their pool for 2 years. And we got, oops, it's not here, sorry. And we got a beautiful rendition of the ball signal from the pool. So somehow the keyboard seemed to stimulate them producing those sounds. I'm sorry, again, I cobbled this together at the last minute. Just to say one other thing. So in the first year, we had 39 sessions and we had a pretty equal split. Mimicry was just about 19% higher than productive use. So again, we see a lot of this in young children when they're first learning language, they're mimicking and before they use sounds. In the second year, there was a significant increase in productive use, a 1,000-fold more productive use than imitation. This had gone into their repertoire and they were using it. We did not have the wherewithal to analyze all the tapes. I would love to give those tapes to someone now to look at it when they're using these signals in conjunction with the other whistles. We'd have to digitize everything. It's still on analog tape, but carefully stored.
Sorry, what do we mean by imitation there?
Imitation is where it was defined that they produced a facsimile within within 5 seconds of the model sound. So if they hit the computer and they did it right after that, that was the window that we used imitation.
Whereas
everything else was called productive use.
productive just means out of nothing they make the sound
Yeah.
so that they can.
Right. It was either prior to hitting a key or while they were interacting in the session. Okay. So again, it raised so many questions. Are their whistles combinatorial? Again, in the terms of their structure and organization. Were the Dolphin whistles facsimiles referential? They looked like they could be, but we didn't do the appropriate tests. We're actually testing some of this in a new study right now at the Roatan Institute for Marine Sciences. And again, do dolphins use referential communication in their own repertoires? And as we heard about signature whistles, people have suggested that dolphin signature whistles may be referential in nature. But again, here's some of the first evidence that they may use other signals that are referential as well. Well, we were super limited by the technology. Again, if this was 1983 when we did this, we could barely do it. My colleagues and I have now created, do I have till 4:30, Dave? Created a Dolphin touchscreen. We've been very fortunate to get funding from NSF to do this and do make some other equipment we're using now too. We wanted to make a system that would be dolphin safe. So this is Marcelo Magnasco and some of his postdocs, Anna Hosivar, who helped us with this, Sean Woodward, and Jen Savoy from my lab. We worked at the National Aquarium in Baltimore. I'm going to go through this super quickly just to give you an idea about some of the technology that we can use now. We built a 4x8 foot touch screen. We did some programs. We made some games for dolphins to play. The idea is this is an optical touch screen. It's not really a touch screen at all. We have a camera behind a window, and anything you can put on your computer, you can rear project on a touch screen. And then the dolphins are sensed with the camera. We used polarized filters so we could the cameras could see through what we projected. And it works. We tested it with dolphins. The first day we gave the touch screen, I'm going to skip this. First day we gave the touch screen to the dolphins, we made a whack a fish kind of game for the dolphins. And here with dolphins, this is Foster. We had two males stopped as soon as the fish came on. You can see down here where they're touching. We've removed the dolphin from the screen. All the dots are the dolphin touching. Immediately started touching this. These are non-technological animals interacting like teenagers with a touch screen. The good news is they got bored right away. After 2 sessions, it's like, that's it. Not interested. Sean,
Shane,
I'm sorry.
Were they vocalizing?
Sometimes, not all the time, but I'll show you something else that where they are vocalizing. We've been doing a lot of tests. We wanted to ask the question. This was for enrichment and also for learning about their cognitive ability. We gave them images of conspecifics, bottlenose dolphins and spotted dolphins with and without sound. We're just working up this data now. These are the two dolphins, and they showed a great deal of interest in looking at this. We did a whole study where it's blue screen, then it turns in, and then it's 15 seconds of blue screen, and then this kind of screen, and then blue screen. And they're actually tracking these guys. This was, and we found that they seem to stay, whoops, and then as soon as the screen, so they're there, and then that's it. And we even gave them a little acoustic signal. We also looked to see whether if we showed them a dolphin producing bubble rings that we had recorded, if that would stimulate them to produce bubble rings. It did not, but they were interested, and you can see the orientations of the dolphins while they're watching. They're trying to track this animal on the screen. You can see their head movements, but they never produced bubbles. And we showed them different dolphins from different facilities producing bubbles, but they were interested. You can see them following down. It's kind of funny to watch this, how interested they are. And we recorded all their vocalizations. I think these can be good tools for dolphins in aquaria. Yeah.
Did you ever show them video of themselves?
They've seen themselves using mirrors. We did a study with this group and showed with these guys that they recognize themselves younger than children. Not that they're smarter necessarily. They're on an advanced trajectory. They're born in a really precocious state. They literally have to hit the water swimming. And their sensory development, their sensory motor skills are advanced as well. So they're sort of parallel that way, but they just show it earlier. Yeah.
I mean, so I guess my question is, how close is their eyesight to our eyesight, and what are they, because they also interact with sonar and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What do they
That's
see on the
such a
screen?
Thank you for asking. It's such a great question. So, when you watch them, we know that there's some overlap in visual fields. We've been doing some studies on visual laterality, but these guys are right up against the screen. And it looks like there's a lot of not binocular vision. And we were surprised that we're not seeing preferential viewing and that how close they're looking. And we've seen this across several studies. It's true of the mirror too, because when they came up to the mirror, they were very close to the mirror. And we were frankly really surprised by that. We thought that they would be much further away and maybe show some eye bias. In our studies, and as well as many other studies, they show a strong right eye bias for foraging. Do you see that also in sperm whales, a right eye bias?
Well, they're foraging at it without light, so it's a bit different, but
Right.
that's something we're looking at now, the
Yeah.
final approaches and spinning to the right versus left.
Yeah, spinning to the right.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's a lateral asymmetry when it's ongoing,
Yeah.
but yeah, maybe.
Because when dolphins are crater feeding, they always spin to the right and go down to their eye down that way. And it's interesting. Anyway, so I don't know where this keyboard will take us, but I couldn't help putting this one up. I think what's interesting is I do think these technologies, at least for dolphins in captivity, that need stimulation, and I think we can enrich their lives, and that can enrich our science as well. And I do think it's a great window, all puns intended, into the mind of the dolphin. But I do want to mention something because real quickly. So I did a paper. It was Julian Mayer, who's a French anthropologist who's been studying human whistled languages for many, many years. Marcelo Minasco, my collaborator at Rockefeller. And the three of us have been working together to look at human whistled languages and the implications for studying animal communication signals. We published this paper in 2022. It was actually part of a conference. And what's so fascinating is, and I think this is such an important thing for all of us here, that we tend to assume that animals are not, I say we, in general, we've assumed as a species that other animals' signals are somehow just emotive. That's where we kind of came from, that we're the only species that really pack lots of information in these signals. And, even with vervet monkeys, it was first assumed that vervet's signals were emotive only. And then it was shown by others that there may be something much more semantic in those signals. So when linguists started looking at human whistle languages, and just if those of you don't know about what human whistle languages, René Busnel and Klaas and Pike, I studied with René when I was in graduate school. They did the first work showing there were these human whistle languages, and these languages are all based on tonal and atonal. They're in both found in both tonal and atonal languages. The one thing in common is that people who live in areas where spoken word won't travel through mountainous regions, distances, modify their communication so into whistle language. And when René Guy and his colleagues started looking at this, they thought that they could communicate information. They actually brought them into the lab. They did X-rays to look at how they produced whistles and what was conveyed. And they say, yeah, we convey information. Now with much more work by Julian Mayer and his colleagues, and René Guy had introduced me to Julian many years ago. They're now finding these whistles are actually articulated. There's actually a modification where they're articulating vowels and consonants. We don't hear them. And what's really amazing is that linguists for years have said these human whistle languages cannot possibly convey complex information. It's the same information as in speech because we can interrogate the whistlers and say, what's in the whistle? So I think this is a huge thing for us because, again, we're so biased to thinking what form should the information be encoded in. If we weren't humans and we looked at sound spectrographs, maybe we wouldn't think that would encode information. But I think what can be in that, and when you look at things, even like if you look at whistles, Marcelo's been looking at phase differences in some of the, and there are so many little changes that you don't see in a spectrogram that you see when you look at phase differences. The other thing I want to just mention is that when we look at human whistle languages, because we know what words they're representing, the individual elements are not always separated by periods of silence, by intervals of silence. So in bird song and in looking at dolphins and most animals, we can define elements and then look at how those elements separated by intervals of silence are organized. But if we looked at human speech that way, the whistled speech, we'd be wrong. We're making assumptions. We process these streams of sound psychoacoustically. We have to know something about the meaning to parse it in a meaningful way. And I think when we look at the communication of other animals, if we can get some kind of cipher, and this is something that you've been looking at, this idea of finding ciphers, I think by giving them some kind of artificial code, and maybe this isn't appropriate for free-ranging animals, I don't know, but I think by giving them some kind of code and they can show us how they use it, I think it's a real way in to at least looking at perhaps organization and finding a cipher. Yeah.
Is it time for questions we can ask?
Yeah, sure. I don't think there's that. I was just gonna make one last pitch.
Yeah.
Okay, this I think we all share. When we watch these animals, I know so many of us, and I'm going to speak for Roger Payne, who's a dear friend of mine that we just lost. We've all been, I think we're all really dedicated to taking our science and applying it in any way we can to raise public awareness about animals. And we can call it advocacy, or we can just call it public science communication. But I think it's terribly important because I think our science really represents these animals that don't have voices that we understand to speak for themselves. So I love this meeting because I think a lot of you share this idea of what we can call scientific advocacy and translational science. And I think it's for us scientists, it really is a time where we can use what we're learning to try to get public awareness up and get better protection for the animals. So I always try to get that pitch in. Anyway, I'll stop talking.
Yeah, here. Okay, I had a question, maybe this is a technical question. You were talking about that these dolphins you were working with can translate from like a facsimile of an object to the physical object.
They can produce facsimiles of the sounds, of the model sounds, and they spontaneously will use them. Meaning, I'm using the word spontaneous, meaning we didn't explicitly train it. One could argue that they're temporally associated, so they're learning associations like we do, but we didn't train it explicitly by using we didn't even know when they were producing these until we would analyze each session later.
Okay, got it. Okay. Thank you. My question is, you said that association could be referential, but you didn't do the study yet. So my question is really more about the kind of thresholds of meaning. And so in the social sciences, right, I've been told by so many, like you can't say, and this is going to amplify our understanding of the Cold War, because the concept of understanding is not measurable, unlike other units of analysis. So I'm really curious about the technical processes and even the theory behind measuring what you're calling, I think what is understanding, but perhaps that's the referential concept that you're trying to parse.
Yeah. When we think about referential, I mean, I should ask you guys, what would be convincing evidence that these were functioning referentially? One of the things we're doing right now in the study is we're going to ask, when they get this kind of experience, if we ask if they can comprehend that signal, when we give it in a new context. So if we ask an animal, can you fetch, if they know to fetch something, and then we do probes where they're not trained, and we run probes and ask them, we see how else they use it. I mean, it's really, it gets into, there's a thing called Sidman equivalency. I don't know if everybody's familiar with that. If I learn a spoken word, and then for ball, and then I learn the written word or the visual word for ball, and then I see a ball, there's like A, B, C. Are they all equivalent? If you learn the connection between A and B and A and C, will you automatically do B and C and know that they're connected? There's an equivalency between that. Those are the kinds of things we want to do. And they've done a lot of that work with the great apes. So it's been done with parrots too, but it hasn't been done with dolphins yet.
That's super fascinating. So it seems to me that the referentiality is related to like abstract thinking. I'm wondering, or like transductional, translational thinking. So have you done experiments where like you have two different kinds of rings, and then the icon of the ring, or not the icon of the ball that is not produced in like a circle shape, that's generalizable knowledge. They can understand like the object, the functionality of what a ring is at different scales?
We've done, yeah, well, we haven't done an explicit experiment. What we do is we give them lots of different kinds of balls, lots of different kinds of rings, and we get that sound no matter what that, if it's within that category of object, if that's the closest you've gotten. Yeah, right.
Think about these things. I guess you have to start somewhere, right? And like nouns. And I'm wondering, to what extent do you or anyone you know do stuff like verbs or other part, like swim faster? Like,
Yeah, something relevant to them.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Trainers have used signals to get animals to do a fast swim, but a slow swim in a trained context. Lou Herman's lab has done lots of work teaching gestural communication to dolphins. They did it in stepwise way where they used food and social rewards, but it was reinforced by food, but there was a lot of social praise, which is important. And they trained them on nouns and verbs, but then modifiers. Okay, so it could be an object that was to the left or the right. And they worked with two different dolphins, Achaia Kamai and Phoenix, and did inverse grammars with them too. So they're showing that the dolphins could learn independent of the specific grammar, that each dolphin had a different grammar that they used. That makes sense. They did a lot of really fascinating work. So if anybody's interested in that.
Go ahead. I've asked a few questions already. No, please.
Simple. Is there any research on dolphins expressing emotions? So this sound for pain, this other sound for excitement.
I've been sitting on this paper for a long time, and there has been work, and I think it's critical. Okay, years ago, John Lilly, we were talking about Lilly, he did a lot of early work. A lot of his work was highly speculative. It made it very difficult for a lot of us afterwards because he speculated about things and raised, I think, a public anticipation. But some of the work, a lot of the work he did earlier that was published in Science, he reported a distress call. And he said, and the call looked like a rise and then a falling call, and sometimes it had a break in it. And we have a good deal of data on this. And I think that it's quite interesting, because if we could find a call that represented distress, that would be a great that would help us in terms of a welfare, animal welfare. This is I've presented this or some things already. I think often what we do, what happens is we've seen this call in a variety of contexts in different facilities. This call's been associated with periods of time when an animal will die over a weekend, and if you look at their normal signature whistle, it's different than what this distress call is. We actually have some data that we're working up now. Personally, I think what we've got is a signature whistle and then a falling component that may be distress. There's a 1966 paper about this by Bisnell and his colleagues as well about distress calls. I think this is a really important area for
Yeah,
work.
because in terms of, this is lawyer in me, in terms of translational science advocacy, this is what you need. I mean, in terms of animal welfare, the first thing that anyone who's the non-expert in dolphins would understand is that there might be something going on in terms of producing distress to dolphins that could be equivalent to torture and something along those lines.
In the Cove, many of you know the film The Cove. I was the person who told Luis Ahoyas, the director, about this. I was doing advocacy work to try to stop that in Japan. I won't prolong this, but I got recordings of the dolphins in these drive hunts, and they're these falling calls frequently when it starts. No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think when we can start really translating what animals are doing there are many species that show distress calls, by the way, that we know that are published. I think one of the really interesting things beyond that is that in looking to see if there's any universality of what we see in distress calls, because there are many species that will have a falling slope in a distress call as well. So that's
Right, last bit. Is there any expression of grief when
behaviorally, yes, you do see this, and I've seen this. It's been well reported. Have you seen this in any of the whales that you've observed? When one animal that's particularly close with another dies, you'll see anything
We
unusual?
don't have anything like the calf carrying like some of the orca or I mean, these were like viral videos recently too, that we've never seen that in the sperm whales. We've seen the opposite, which is like a clear joy of new calves when they're very new, but we haven't seen anything. But I suppose that's the difference between happy birthday and a funeral, right? Like one is more acoustic than the other, at least in humans. So it's a fascinating space for sure.
And in elephants, there's evidence of changes in behavior around, and also in dolphins, you'll see, we'll often see we saw this at Marine World, where I was working in the area where they were doing more demonstrations, where the closest buddy of one of the animals that died, Spock, completely went off her feed. The other animals didn't, and I've heard this reported before. Yeah, it's hard to know what's going on inside an animal's head. You just have behavior.
Dolphins aren't just.
I think I'm out. Am I out?
I just had
sorry.
one question if there's time. One of the things that is most fascinating to me is the results you described where they appear to combine their signature whistle with something else. And it makes me wonder if there's a possibility that they're using their own signature whistle referentially to refer to themselves, just as it's been suggested that they use imitations of signature whistles to referentially refer to somebody else.
Yeah.
It almost the same way that we use the pronoun I to refer to ourselves. Do you think it's possible that they're using, like when they're stringing together their signature whistle with a distress call, or stringing together the artificial symbol for belly rub with themselves, that they're indicating that this applies to me?
I don't know. I think it's provocative finding that we saw. I think actually we're doing some work on that now in a new study. So maybe we'll have more to report, because we don't really know the nature of how they perceive their own signal, do we? And we know that they can refer to others, but we don't know about their own perception. So it's something we're looking at right now at this new project we're working on. So it's an interesting thing. I don't know. You're doing the elephant work. Are you the person?
Yeah.
I'm dying to hear about this. It sounds fascinating. We have so much to learn. It's such a great time for us to be working together now with these tools.
Questions?
Any more questions? Did you?
I was wondering, I was very interested in what you said about like the segmentation problem and like because in language acquisition from what I know, like it's kind of a puzzle because the way you know how to segment words is because you know what the words mean, and so you can tell them apart, right? Because we don't actually stop. There's apart from like maybe meter cues, there's no like signal as to like when a word starts and when another one begins. So I was wondering, like, you say this is an open problem in the beginning, but what you think about like how to figure out like a set of vocabulary items, or like how to start doing segmentation at all?
Yeah, again, I think it gets into trying to figure out what the smallest units are to see how it breaks down. That's why I think this human whistle language work. I mean, this is a great database. If anybody wants to work on this, I think it's superb. And we've been dying to find the right group to work with to look at these human whistles. And it would be great to test this. How good are we at finding this with human whistles? If we can look at the smallest elements because we know what they are, seeing how they're combined, doesn't mean other animal communication systems are at all organized like this at all. But it'll be a great test bank, I think, to try it and then see, to sharpen our skills.
Even normal speech doesn't have segmentation, like
No.
silence.
And see, that's the thing. We always go. I think what's so interesting is that for us, because we don't know how it's divided up, we sort of have historically said, okay, if there's silences, we'll define this as an element and the other. And we have no way to test that yet. So that's why I thought these human whistle language things at least gets us thinking about that. And also, I think, again, the fact that you can put complex information in a simple looking signal, whether it's clicks, organized a certain way, or whistles, these are big brains.
All right, thank you. Thank you very
so
much, Dana. This-
Say that we have a reception out there. You're supposed to go to 5:30, but then there's dinner at my house at 7, so pace yourself.
I'll just also close out for the live stream.
What?
For the people that are listening on the live stream, that we'll start up again tomorrow at 9:30 in the morning. Okay. Yeah, so now.
And just to get to 902 Euclid, those who want to